Imagine yourself waking in the pre-dawn chill of a small apartment in Paris. The year is 1941. The air that drifts through your window is still the air of Paris, carrying the familiar sense of coal smoke and baking bread from the local boulangerie. But it is layered now with something new, something alien. It is the low, intermittent hum of Luftwaffe patrol planes overhead, a constant metallic reminder of who is now in charge. You are a Frenchman, a Parisian, but the uniform you're about to put on is no longer entirely your own. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like, or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are an agent of the Gendarmerie Nationale, a French policeman. Before the fall of France in 1940, this uniform was a symbol of the Republic, of liberté, égalité, fraternité. It represented order, civic pride, and the authority of a sovereign nation. Now, its meaning is confused, muddied. The Republic is gone, replaced by the fractured reality of the Vichy regime in the south and the direct German military occupation in the north, where you are. You still wear the familiar dark blue kepi and tunic, but you serve two masters, one French and collaborationist, the other German, and absolute. Your orders come from your own French prefect, but those orders are now dictated by the German commandantur and scrutinized by the quiet, watchful men in grey coats from the Gestapo. You are a tool of an occupying force, and your own people know it. Your day does not begin with a dramatic raid or a high-stakes investigation. It begins with the mundane, soul-crushing bureaucracy of occupation. Your first duty is at the local precinct, the commissariat, a building that smells of stale cigarette smoke, damp wool, and cheap ink. You sit at a wooden desk under a single dim light bulb, and you process paperwork, endless paperwork. The primary task is the management of daily life, which is now a constant struggle for resources. You issue ration cards for bread, for meat, for coal, for wine. The portions are meagre, and the lines of tired, anxious citizens stretch down the block. You see the faces of your neighbors, people you have known your whole life. They come to your desk, their expressions a mixture of desperation and thinly veiled resentment. They need a stamp, a signature, a permit to travel to a neighboring town to visit a sick relative. You are the face of the system that denies them, that controls their every movement, that dictates whether their children will have enough to eat tonight. You hold the stamp in your hand, a small instrument of immense power, and you feel the weight of every hungry gaze. You must follow the regulations. To make an exception for an old friend could be seen as favoritism, an act of defiance that could bring unwanted attention from your superiors, or worse, from the Germans. So you stamp the papers that are in order, and you turn away the ones that are not. Your voice a flat, official monotone that betrays none of the guilt churning in your stomach. Your job is to enforce the new rules, the rules of the occupation. You check identity papers, the carte d'identité, which every citizen must now carry at all times. You enforce the strict curfew, ensuring the streets are empty after 11 p.m. You break up illegal gatherings of more than a few people. You are a constant, visible reminder of the city's subjugation. When you walk down the street, you notice how your countrymen react to you. The older ones, the ones who remember the Great War, often look at you with a kind of weary pity, but many others avert their eyes. They turn their heads, they cross the street to avoid you. Their silence is a judgment, a quiet accusation that is louder than any shout. They see the uniform, and they see a collaborator, a collabo. It doesn't matter if you are just trying to feed your family, if you are just doing your job. In their eyes, you have chosen a side, and it is the wrong one. This daily burden of quiet contempt is a heavy one to carry. It isolates you. It turns your own city into a foreign land. The fear you carry is twofold. You are afraid of your own people, and you are afraid of your new masters. You are aware of the nascent resistance, the maquis. You hear the whispers. You see the crude V for victory signs scrawled on walls overnight, signs you are ordered to have cleaned off by morning. You might even know who is involved. Perhaps it is the baker who slips an extra roll to a hungry child, or the quiet bookseller whose shop is a known meeting place. You see them, you know them, and you say nothing. To report them would be to betray your own countrymen, to become a true collaborator. But to say nothing, to look the other way, is its own kind of risk. What if someone else reports them? What if the Germans find out that you knew and did nothing? Your silence could be interpreted as complicity, and the Gestapo's methods of interrogation are notoriously effective, and so you walk a tightrope of moral compromise. Every day is a series of small, agonizing choices. You see a young man with no papers. Do you arrest him, knowing he could be a resistor, or just a boy trying to avoid being sent to a labor camp in Germany? Or do you pretend you didn't see the fear in his eyes and let him go with a gruff warning? You hear a family in the apartment above yours listening to the BBC on a forbidden radio, the faint, tinny voice of Free France, a thread of hope in the darkness. Do you report them, as the regulations demand? Or do you simply turn up the volume on your own radio, a quiet act of solidarity that could cost you everything if discovered? The most soul-destroying of your duties are the ones where you are ordered to directly assist the German authorities. You might be sent to provide security for a German patrol as they conduct a house-to-house search. You stand there, in your French uniform, a silent witness, while German soldiers ransack the home of a French family, your presence lending a false legitimacy to the violation. And then there are the roundups. In 1941, the systematic persecution of the Jewish population is just beginning, but the signs are there. You are ordered to help enforce the laws that require Jewish citizens to register, to have their identity cards stamped with the word Juif. You are ordered to assist in the seizure of their businesses, their property. And then, one night, you are woken and told to report to a certain neighborhood. You are given a list of names of families. Your job is to go with the Germans, to knock on the doors, to assist in herding these people, men, women, children, the elderly, out of their homes and into waiting trucks. You tell yourself you are just keeping order. You tell yourself that if you don't do it, a German soldier will, and perhaps they would be more brutal. This is the lie you must live with, the justification you whisper to yourself in the dark. But as you see the terror on the faces of the children, as you hear the weeping of the mothers, you know what you are doing. You are participating in an act of profound, inhuman cruelty. You are a cog in a machine of destruction, and the grease that allows that machine to run smoothly is the quiet compliance of men like you. The memory of these nights will become a permanent stain on your soul, a ghost that will follow you for the rest of your days. Your personal life shrinks, becoming as constrained and grey as the city itself. You return to your small apartment after your shift. The silence of the rooms a welcome but heavy blanket. Your wife, if you have one, looks at you with a quiet, worried expression. She does not ask about your day. She does not want to know. The unspoken things hang in the air between you. Your meals are simple, dictated by the ration cards. Stale bread, thin soup, perhaps a small piece of cheese or sausage bought on the black market at an exorbitant price. You eat in silence, the taste of your food mingled with the quiet guilt of your profession. You might go to a cafe for a glass of rough wine, but even there, the atmosphere is different. The conversations are hushed, furtive. People glance over their shoulders before they speak. A careless word, an anti-German joke overheard by the wrong person, could lead to a visit from the Gestapo. There is no real relaxation, no true escape. The occupation is a constant low-level pressure that infiltrates every aspect of life. You sleep, but your sleep is not restful. It is filled with anxiety dreams, with the faces of the people you have processed, the people you have ignored, the people you have helped to condemn. You wake in the morning, and the cycle begins again. You put on the uniform, the symbol of your impossible position. You are not a monster. You are not a hero. You are something in between, something more common and perhaps more tragic. You are an ordinary man, trying to survive in a time that demands extraordinary choices. You are a keeper of a peace that is not peace, an enforcer of a law that is not just, and every day you must look at yourself in the mirror and live with the man you have become. This is the quiet, grinding reality of your life, a daily struggle fought not on a battlefield, but in the grey, compromised territory of your own conscience. Let us now retreat from the crowded, morally ambiguous streets of occupied Paris and turn our focus to the story of a single individual. History is often told through the actions of such people, men and women who, through a combination of circumstance, character, and sheer will, come to embody the spirit of their time. In the fractured, humiliated France of the early 1940s, a nation struggling to find its soul, one such man emerged from the quiet corridors of civic administration to become a legend. He was not a general, nor a politician in the traditional sense. He was a civil servant, a man of art and intellect, who would become the unlikely heart of the French resistance. This is the story of Jean Moulin. To understand the man he would become, we must first understand the man he was. Jean Moulin was born in 1899 in the sun-drenched south of France in the town of Béziers. His childhood was steeped in the values of the French Third Republic. His father was a history professor and a respected local politician, a man deeply committed to the secular, democratic, and republican ideals that had shaped modern France. From his father, Moulin inherited a profound belief in justice, a deep love for his country, and a quiet but unshakable faith in the power of reasoned, principled governance. He was a brilliant student, and his path seemed clear. He was destined for a life in public service. He was also an artist. In his private life, he was a talented cartoonist and painter, signing his work with the pseudonym Romanin. His art was witty, modern, and full of life, revealing a side of his personality that his formal public career often concealed. A man of passion, sensitivity, and a keen, observant eye. This duality is key to understanding him. He was both a pragmatic man of order and a romantic idealist, a bureaucrat with the soul of a poet. His career as a civil servant was meteoric. He became France's youngest sous-préfet, deputy prefect, and then, in 1937, its youngest prefect. A prefect in France is the state's highest representative in a department, a position of immense administrative power and prestige. Moulin served in various regions, earning a reputation for being intelligent, efficient, and deeply principled. He was a man of the left, a supporter of the Popular Front government in the 1930s, and he used his position to secretly aid Spanish Republican refugees fleeing Franco's regime, an early sign of his willingness to defy authority for a cause he believed in. When war broke out in 1939, he was the prefect of the Eure-et-Loire department, based in the cathedral city of Chartres. He was a man at the peak of his profession, a respected pillar of the French state. And then, in the summer of 1940, that state and his entire world crumbled. The German invasion of France was a swift and catastrophic event. The French army, believed to be one of the finest in the world, was shattered in a matter of weeks. As the German army advanced on Chartres in June 1940, Moulin faced a choice. Many officials fled in the chaos. Moulin stayed. He saw it as his duty to remain with the people of his city, to try and ensure a semblance of order amidst the panic and collapse. It was his first act of quiet defiance. When the Germans entered Chartres, they came to him with a demand. They had found the bodies of several women and children in a nearby village, killed during a German bombing raid. The German command, wanting to cover up this atrocity, had concocted a story that the civilians had been massacred by French colonial troops, Senegalese soldiers who had been fighting in the area. They presented Moulin with a document, a formal proclamation for him to sign, attesting to this lie. They wanted to use his authority as the French prefect to validate their propaganda. Moulin refused. He was a representative of the French Republic, and he would not put his name to a lie that slandered its soldiers and dishonored its dead. The Germans insisted. They arrested him. They beat him. They dragged him through the streets, trying to humiliate him into compliance. He was locked in a room, and through the night, his captors continued to beat and threaten him. They told him that if he did not sign by morning, he would be executed. In that dark room, alone and in pain, Jean Moulin faced the fundamental choice that would define the rest of his life, and in many ways, the moral struggle of his nation. He could sign the paper, a small act of compromise to save his own life, a pragmatic choice that many others were making all across France. Or he could resist. He knew that the Germans would likely kill him anyway, or simply forge his signature. His personal defiance would, in a practical sense, change nothing. But for Moulin, it was not about practicalities. It was about honor. It was about the soul of France. He would not be the instrument of their lies. Fearing that under further torture he might break, that they might force his hand to sign the document, he made a desperate decision. He found a piece of broken glass on the floor of his cell, and he drew it across his own throat. It was not a successful suicide attempt. It was a gesture, a final terrible act of defiance. He was choosing near certain death on his own terms, rather than dishonor at the hands of his enemies. When the Germans found him the next morning, bleeding and near death, they were taken aback. This quiet, unassuming bureaucrat possessed a will of iron they had not anticipated. Perhaps seeing that he would be of no further use to them, they had him treated and eventually released him. The deep, ragged scar on his neck would remain with him for the rest of his life. He would forever after wear a scarf to conceal it. But that scar was more than a physical mark. It was a symbol. It was the mark of his commitment, the outward sign of an inner transformation. The prefect of the Third Republic had died in that cell. A resistor had been born. The Vichy government, the new collaborationist French state led by Marshal Pétain, soon dismissed Moulin from his post. He was seen as unreliable, a man of the old republic, out of step with the new order of collaboration. This dismissal was, for Moulin, a liberation. He was now a private citizen, free from the constraints of his official duties, and he began to use that freedom. He spent the next year travelling throughout the unoccupied free zone of southern France, using his old contacts and his intimate knowledge of the French administration to make a comprehensive assessment of the nascent resistance movements. What he found was a landscape of heroic but chaotic disunity. The resistance was not a single organisation. It was a scattered collection of small, isolated groups, often deeply suspicious of one another. There were groups loyal to the old political parties, communists, socialists, conservative Catholics. There were urban networks focused on propaganda and sabotage, and rural groups, the Maquis, beginning to form in the hills. They were all fighting the Germans and Vichy, but they were not fighting together. They were divided by political ideology, by regional loyals, and by personal rivalries. Moulin saw with absolute clarity that this disunity was a fatal weakness. If the resistance was to become a truly effective force, if it was to be more than a collection of minor annoyances to the German occupiers, it had to be unified. It needed a single coherent structure, a clear chain of command, and most importantly, a single source of political legitimacy. And he knew where that legitimacy had to come from General Charles de Gaulle in London. De Gaulle was, at this time, a controversial figure. He was a general who had refused to accept the French surrender, who had fled to London and, in a famous radio broadcast, had called on the French people to continue the fight. To the Vichy government, he was a traitor. To many in France, he was a distant, largely unknown figure. But to a growing few, he was the symbol of a free, fighting France, the only credible alternative to the shame of collaboration. Moulin believed that uniting the internal resistance under the political authority of de Gaulle was the only way forward. In September of 1941, with a forged passport and a heart full of purpose, Moulin embarked on a long and perilous journey. He travelled through neutral Spain and Portugal, and finally made his way to London. He arrived unannounced, a quiet man in a dark suit, one of many French exiles seeking to join the cause. But Moulin was different. He was not just another soldier. He was a high-ranking official of the Republic, a man who had seen the reality of the internal resistance firsthand. He secured a meeting with General de Gaulle. The two men were very different in temperament. De Gaulle was famously aloof, imperious, a man who saw himself as the living embodiment of France. Moulin was quiet, discreet, a man who preferred to work in the shadows. But they shared a common vision, the restoration of a free and independent French Republic. Moulin laid out his assessment of the situation in France. He described the courage and the potential of the resistance, but he also stressed its dangerous fragmentation. He argued, with the cool logic of a seasoned administrator, that he could be the man to unite them, to bring them all under de Gaulle's authority. De Gaulle was impressed. He saw in Moulin not just a patriot, but a man of immense competence and political skill. He saw a man who could be his bridge, his personal delegate to the complex and treacherous world of the internal resistance. He gave Moulin his mission. He was to parachute back into France under the codename Max. His task was to make contact with the leaders of the three largest resistance movements in the non-occupied zone, Combat, Libération Sud, and Franc Tireur, and persuade them to join forces, to pool their resources, and to accept the overall political leadership of de Gaulle. He was also given a substantial amount of money, funds to help finance the resistance's operations. On the night of January 2nd, 1942, Jean Moulin, now Max, parachuted from a British plane into the darkness of the Alpilles, a range of low mountains in his native Provence. He landed alone, in the middle of a winter night, with a fake identity, a suitcase full of money, and a mission that seemed all but impossible. He was now a clandestine agent, a man living entirely in the shadows. His work over the next year and a half was a masterclass in diplomacy, patience, and sheer force of will. He was operating in a world of constant mortal danger. Every meeting was a risk. Every contact could be a double agent. Every safe house could be compromised. The Gestapo and the Vichy police were everywhere, their networks of informants extensive. A single mistake, a single careless word, would mean arrest, torture, and death. Moulin, the meticulous administrator, applied his skills to this new underground world. He traveled constantly, moving from city to city, from Lyon to Marseille to Toulouse, always one step ahead of the police. He adopted multiple identities, his pockets full of forged papers. He was a quiet art dealer, a traveling salesman, a retired official. He met with the leaders of the resistance movements in smoky backrooms of cafes, in quiet apartments, on lonely park benches. These leaders were difficult, proud, and deeply suspicious men. Henri Freinet of Combat, Emmanuel Dastier de la Vigerie of Libération, and Jean-Pierre Lévy of Franc-Tireur were all charismatic and courageous. But they were also rivals. They were wary of each other, and they were deeply skeptical of this mysterious Max who had appeared out of nowhere, claiming to represent de Gaulle, a general they saw as an arrogant and distant figure in London. They were reluctant to give up their autonomy, to cede control of the movements they had built from scratch with their own sweat and blood. Moulin's task was to win their trust. He did it not with grand speeches or charismatic appeals, but with quiet, relentless logic. He listened to their concerns. He mediated their disputes. He demonstrated his own courage and commitment, and he used the money de Gaulle had given him as a powerful tool of persuasion. The resistance movements were chronically short of funds for everything from printing leaflets to buying weapons. Moulin's ability to provide this financial support gave him immense leverage. Slowly, painstakingly, he broke down the walls of suspicion. He convinced them that their small, independent actions were not enough. He argued that only a unified movement with a clear political leadership recognized by the Allies could hope to play a significant role in the liberation of France and have a seat at the table when the war was over. He was asking them to subordinate their personal ambitions to a greater cause, the cause of a united, free France. His greatest achievement came in May of 1943. After months of secret negotiations, he finally succeeded in bringing all the major resistance movements, not just the three largest, but also the main political parties and trade unions, together. In a quiet apartment in Paris, on the Rue de Four, he convened the first meeting of the Conseil National de la Résistance, CNR, the National Council of the Resistance. It was a moment of incredible historical significance. For the first time, all the disparate, feuding factions of the French internal resistance were united in a single body, and they formally recognized General de Gaulle as their political leader. Jean Moulin had done it. He had accomplished his impossible mission. He had given the French resistance a unified voice, a coherent structure, and a clear political purpose. He had forged a weapon that would play a crucial role in the liberation of France in the year to come. It was the crowning achievement of his life, and it would lead directly to his death. The very success of the CNR made it, and its leader, a prime target for the Gestapo. The Germans knew that a unified resistance was a far greater threat than a collection of scattered groups. They redoubled their efforts to find and destroy its leadership. And in the clandestine world of the resistance, where secrecy was paramount, there was always the danger of betrayal. In June of 1943, just a few weeks after the historic meeting of the CNR, a key resistance general was arrested by the Gestapo in Paris. This arrest set off a catastrophic chain reaction. The general's network was compromised. Under torture, names and addresses were revealed. The Gestapo was closing in. A high-level meeting of the resistance leadership was scheduled for June 21st to be held in the home of a doctor in Caluire-et-Cuire, a suburb of the city of Lyon. Jean Moulin, as the head of the CNR, was to preside over the meeting. It was a trap. Someone within the resistance, whether through treachery, carelessness, or torture, had betrayed the location of the meeting. As the resistance leaders gathered in the doctor's office, the Gestapo, led by the infamous SS officer Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, burst in. Jean Moulin, along with the other leaders, was arrested. He was taken to the Gestapo headquarters at the Hotel Terminus in Lyon. He knew what was coming. He knew that the Germans would torture him to get the names of the other resistance leaders, the secrets of the organization he had built. He knew that he was the living repository of the entire structure of the French resistance, and he knew that he could not, under any circumstances, break. The details of what happened to Jean Moulin in the days that followed are grim and fragmentary. We know that he was interrogated and tortured relentlessly by Klaus Barbie and his men. They wanted names, codes, locations. They used all the brutal methods at their disposal. But Jean Moulin did not talk. The man who had slit his own throat rather than sign a lie now faced an even greater test of his will. He held the fate of the entire French resistance within him, and he refused to betray it. Witnesses who saw him during this time described a man who was beaten beyond recognition. His face a swollen, unrecognizable mask of bruises and cuts. He was in a coma for much of the time. In a brief moment of consciousness, when his captors gave him a piece of paper and a pencil and demanded he write down the names of his comrades, he used his last ounce of strength to draw a caricature. It was a cartoon of his torturer, Klaus Barbie. It was his final act of defiance, a small, artistic gesture of contempt from the man they could not break. Sometime around July 8, 1943, Jean Moulin died. The exact circumstances are unclear. He may have died under torture in Lyon, or on the train that was transporting him to a concentration camp in Germany. The official German report claimed he died of a lung infection. A transparent lie. He died because his body finally gave out under the unspeakable brutality inflicted upon it. He died without ever revealing a single secret. He died protecting the movement he had created. His death was a devastating blow to the resistance, but it was not a fatal one. The organization he had built was strong enough to survive his loss. The CNR continued its work, and the unified resistance played a vital role in the D-Day landings and the subsequent liberation of France. Jean Moulin, in his death, became something more than a man. He became a martyr, a national hero, the ultimate symbol of the spirit of French resistance. For decades after the war, his body lay in an anonymous grave. But in 1964, in a solemn national ceremony, his presumed ashes were transferred to the Pantheon in Paris, the great secular temple where France honors its most revered citizens. On that day, the French Minister of Culture, André Malraux, delivered one of the most famous speeches in modern French history. He spoke of Moulin, the quiet prefect who became the leader of the people of the night, the shadowy army of the resistance. He evoked the image of Moulin's final defiant act, the drawing of the caricature. On that day, Malraux said, the face of France was the face of a dead man. The story of Jean Moulin is more than a biography. It is a profound meditation on the nature of courage. His was not the flashy courage of the battlefield. It was a quieter, deeper, more resilient kind of courage. It was the courage of a man who, armed with little more than his own integrity and a profound belief in the ideals of his country, faced down the totalitarian machine and refused to yield. It was the courage of quiet conversations in back rooms, of lonely journeys in the dark, of whispered passwords and forged papers. And it was, in the end, the courage of silence, the ability to endure unimaginable pain in order to protect the cause to which he had dedicated and ultimately given his life. He remains a powerful, quiet figure, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest battles are not fought by armies, but by the indomitable will of a single, principled human being. Let us now follow Jean Moulin and his comrades into the world they inhabited. To escape the constant surveillance of the occupier, the resistance had to go underground, not just figuratively, but literally. The cities of France, particularly Paris, are built upon a foundation of deep history, a labyrinth of cellars, sewers, ancient quarries, and catacombs. During the years of occupation, this hidden subterranean world became a second city, a shadow city, a place of refuge, work, and transit for those who fought in the darkness. It was a world shared unknowingly by resistance fighters, German soldiers, and ordinary citizens, a secret landscape of immense strategic importance. Imagine yourself as a young resistance courier in Paris in 1942. Your mission is simple, but perilous: to deliver a message from one resistance cell leader to another. You cannot use the telephone, the lines are tapped. You cannot use the mail, it is censored. You must deliver it by hand. You walk through the streets of the city, your heart pounding. The coded message, a small, dangerous weight in your pocket. You are being watched. Every policeman on the corner, every German soldier lounging at a cafe, every quiet neighbor sweeping their doorstep could be an informant. The open streets are a place of danger. Your destination, therefore, is not a house or an office. It is a hole in the ground. You arrive at a small, unassuming wine shop. The proprietor gives you a quiet, prearranged signal. He leads you to the back, through a storeroom that smells of sour wine and damp earth. He moves aside a stack of crates to reveal a heavy wooden trapdoor in the floor. He lifts it, and a wave of cool, musty air rises to meet you. Below is a flight of stone steps, disappearing into absolute darkness. He hands you a small oil lamp, its flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows. "Be careful," he whispers. "The path is marked." You descend, leaving the world of light and air behind, and enter the secret city beneath the streets. The space you enter is a cave, the French word for cellar. Nearly every old building in Paris has one. A vaulted stone chamber used for centuries to store wine, coal, and food. During the occupation, these cellars were repurposed. They became the nerve centers of the resistance. They were clandestine meeting rooms, where leaders like Jean Moulin could gather without fear of being seen. They were makeshift hospitals, where wounded fighters could be treated by sympathetic doctors, far from the official hospitals where their papers would be checked. They were arsenals, where weapons parachuted in by the Allies could be hidden. And perhaps most importantly, they were print shops. In one of these hidden cellars, you might find a small, hand-cranked printing press, its metal clanking softly in the quiet darkness. Here, a small team of men and women work by lamplight, their faces smudged with ink, to produce the underground newspapers of the resistance. Papers with names like Combat, Défense de la France, and Libération. These were not just newspapers, they were a vital lifeline, a source of uncensored news, and a powerful tool of psychological warfare. They published reports from the BBC, they mocked German propaganda, they celebrated acts of sabotage, and they printed the names of collaborators, a quiet but potent threat. The work was dangerous and exhausting. The ink and paper had to be sourced on the black market and smuggled into the city. The presses themselves were heavy, cumbersome machines that had to be secretly disassembled, moved from cellar to cellar, and reassembled in the dead of night to avoid detection. The smell of the ink was a constant danger, a scent that could betray their location to a curious neighbor or a passing patrol. The men and women who printed these papers were not soldiers, but they were fighting a crucial battle for the hearts and minds of the French people. A battle of truth against lies, fought with ink and paper in the dark, damp cellars beneath the city. But the cellar network was just the first layer of the subterranean world. Beneath the cellars lay an even deeper, older, and more mysterious realm: the catacombs. The catacombs of Paris are a vast, sprawling network of tunnels and chambers, the remains of ancient limestone quarries that were mined from Roman times. In the late 18th century, to deal with overflowing cemeteries, the city authorities decided to move the skeletal remains of millions of Parisians into these abandoned quarry tunnels. The result is a macabre, labyrinthine city of the dead. Miles and miles of tunnels lined with neatly stacked human bones and skulls. During the occupation, this city of the dead became a highway for the living. The resistance quickly realized that the catacombs offered a secret, unpoliced network of passages that crisscrossed the entire city. An experienced guide could enter the network through a hidden entrance in a cellar in one part of Paris and emerge miles away in another. It was the perfect system for smuggling weapons, for moving agents from one safe house to another, and for helping downed Allied airmen or escaped prisoners of war to evade capture. Imagine moving through these tunnels. The air is cold and still, carrying the mineral scent of wet limestone and the faint, dry smell of ancient bone. The only light is from your torch or lamp, its beam cutting a small, wavering hole in the oppressive darkness. The walls are not walls of stone, but walls of human history. Skulls stare out at you from the darkness, their empty eye sockets a silent, constant reminder of mortality. The silence is absolute, broken only by the sound of your own footsteps echoing on the stone floor, and the drip, drip, drip of water seeping through the rock from the city far above. Navigating this labyrinth was incredibly dangerous. The network is vast and confusing, and without a guide or a map, it would be easy to get lost forever in the endless, identical-looking tunnels. The resistance had its own specialists, men who knew the catacombs intimately, who had explored them as adventurous youths, and now used that knowledge in the service of their country. They marked safe paths with chalk symbols on the walls, symbols that would be meaningless to the uninitiated, but a vital guide for a resistance courier. The Germans were aware of the catacombs, of course, and they knew they were being used by the resistance. They made periodic patrols into the main entrances, but the network was simply too vast, too complex, to be effectively policed. For every entrance they discovered and sealed, the resistance would find or create another. The catacombs remained a shadowy, contested space throughout the war, a place where the hidden war of occupation was fought in utter darkness, a silent struggle amidst the silent dead. Not all of the subterranean spaces were used by the resistance, however. The occupiers also recognized the strategic value of the world beneath the streets. The German military took over many of the deep, multi-level cellars of central Paris for their own purposes. They were converted into secure command posts, bomb-proof shelters for high-ranking officers, and underground communication centers. The French police, working under German command, established their own subterranean headquarters. In one famous instance, the central command for the Paris police was set up in a large cavern that had once been a subterranean mushroom farm. And most chillingly, the Gestapo established its own underground interrogation and holding cells. They would commandeer the basements of large buildings, like schools or government offices, and convert them into places of pain and despair. These were not formal prisons like the Mamertine we explored earlier. They were improvised, temporary, and all the more terrifying for it. A cellar that had once been used to store wine would be fitted with steel doors and rings bolted to the wall for shackling prisoners. The sounds of interrogation, the screams and the beatings, would be muffled by the thick stone walls, unheard by the citizens walking on the street just a few feet above. Archaeology and memory have given us a glimpse into these forgotten spaces. After the war, these cellars were reclaimed, but the traces of their grim purpose sometimes remained. Faint bloodstains on the floor, initials and dates scratched into the plaster by doomed prisoners, a single rusty shackle forgotten in a dark corner. These small, silent artifacts speak volumes about the suffering that took place in these hidden rooms. They are the quiet, physical evidence of the brutal, secret war fought by the Gestapo against the resistance. A war of torture and interrogation. A war that has left few written records, only scars on the city's soul and faint, desperate messages on its hidden walls. The subterranean world was not just for the combatants. For ordinary citizens, the world beneath the streets also became a place of refuge. During Allied air raids, the city's metro stations were used as public bomb shelters. Thousands of Parisians would descend the stairs into the familiar, tile-lined tunnels of the metro, spending the night on the platforms, huddled together in the darkness. The atmosphere was one of shared anxiety, but also of community. People shared food. They sang songs to keep their spirits up. They told stories to distract the children. The metro station, a symbol of modern urban life, was transformed into a primordial cave, a place where the community gathered together to wait out the storm of fire that raged above them. Even the sewers of Paris, a vast and complex network made famous by Victor Hugo, played their part. They were another hidden transportation network, used by the resistance to move men and materials, especially during the final days of the occupation, the battle for the liberation of Paris in August 1944. Resistance fighters would emerge from manholes behind German lines, stage a surprise attack, and then disappear back into the ground, a ghostly, unseen army moving through the city's hidden arteries. This shadow city, this world beneath the streets, is a powerful metaphor for the experience of occupation itself. Life continued on the surface. People went to work, they shopped, they sat at cafes. But beneath this fragile veneer of normalcy, another reality existed. A reality of secrets, of hidden loyalties, of quiet acts of courage and betrayal. A reality that was lived out in the cold, damp darkness of cellars, tunnels, and caves. To explore this world is to understand the true nature of the resistance. It was not a grand army fighting in open battle. It was a war of moles and ghosts. It was a war that required a different kind of courage. Not the courage to charge into the guns, but the courage to descend into the darkness, to live with the constant gnawing fear of discovery, to work patiently, silently, and invisibly for a future you might never live to see. Today, most of these spaces have been returned to their original functions. The cellars are once again filled with wine. The metro stations are once again filled with commuters, but the memory of their wartime role remains. There are still guided tours of parts of the catacombs where resistance activity took place. There are small, discreet plaques on the walls of buildings, marking the location of a secret printing press or a clandestine meeting. These are quiet monuments to a secret war. They remind us that history is not just what happens in the light. It is also what happens in the darkness, in the forgotten spaces beneath our feet, in the silent hidden rooms where the true soul of a nation is sometimes lost, and sometimes, through quiet, determined struggle, found again. The women in this world are a particularly fascinating study. For some, collaboration was a matter of survival or romance. A young French woman who became the mistress of a German officer gained access to a world of privilege. Better food, better housing, protection from the daily hardships of occupation. These relationships were often condemned by the wider population. The women branded as collabos horizontales, their heads shaved in public acts of humiliation after the liberation. But the reality was often more complex than simple treason. It could be a love affair, a pragmatic choice, or a desperate act of self-preservation. But for the women of the elite, the women who moved in the circles of the Ritz, collaboration was a more sophisticated game. Coco Chanel, the legendary fashion designer, famously spent the war years living in the Ritz with her lover, a high-ranking German intelligence officer. She used her connections to protect her business interests and to navigate the treacherous social landscape of occupied Paris. She was part of a circle of artists, writers, and socialites who chose to stay and work under the Germans. They attended gallery openings sponsored by the German embassy. They went to premieres of plays that had been approved by the German censors. They told themselves they were preserving French culture, keeping the flame of Parisian artistic life alive. But they were also, wittingly or unwittingly, lending their prestige to the occupers, normalizing their presence, and creating a cultural smokescreen for the brutal realities of the regime. The hotel was not just a place of social and economic collaboration, it was also a hotbed of espionage. Its corridors and salons were a neutral ground where spies from all sides could meet and exchange information. A neutral diplomat might have a quiet drink with a German officer, subtly probing for information. A well-connected French socialite might overhear a piece of valuable gossip and pass it on to a contact in the resistance. The Ritz was a place of masks, where no one was quite who they seemed, where every polite conversation could have a hidden meaning, every smile a hidden motive. The very luxury and civility of the place made it the perfect theatre for the quiet, deadly game of intelligence and counterintelligence. Let us follow one of our imagined diners home from the Ritz. He's a high-ranking official in the Vichy government, a man who has chosen to serve Marshal Pétain. He leaves the warm, bright bubble of the hotel and is driven in his chauffeured car through the dark, empty streets of the curfew-bound city. He returns to his grand apartment on the Avenue Foch, an apartment that perhaps once belonged to a Jewish family that has since been deported. His home is filled with fine art, antique furniture, and the quiet comforts of a life untouched by the hardships of the war. He tells himself that he is a patriot. He believes that Marshal Pétain saved France from complete destruction, that collaboration was the only realistic path, the only way to protect the French people from a worse fate. He sees the resistance as a group of reckless terrorists and communists who will only bring more suffering and German reprisals upon the population. He believes his work, the daily grinding work of administration and compromise, is the true act of patriotism. He is preserving the French state, maintaining order, ensuring that the streetlights stay on and the garbage is collected. He is a pragmatist, a realist, but in the quiet of the night, perhaps, a sliver of doubt creeps in. He thinks of the orders he has signed, the compromises he has made. He thinks of the lists of names he has passed on to the German authorities, the lists of men to be sent for forced labor, the lists of Jews to be deported to the east, to a fate he does not allow himself to contemplate too closely. He pushes these thoughts away. They are the necessary price of stability, the regrettable but unavoidable cost of his pragmatic patriotism. He pours himself a glass of fine brandy, turns on the radio to a station playing classical music, and settles into his comfortable chair. He has made his choice, and he will live with it. This world of elite collaboration, of life in the velvet-lined cocoon of the Ritz, is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the occupation to contemplate. It is not the story of monstrous evil or heroic sacrifice. It is the story of quiet, comfortable, and reasoned compromise. It is the story of ordinary human failings, of greed, of ambition, of fear, and most powerfully, of the immense human capacity for self-deception. It is the story of people who were able to convince themselves that they were doing the right thing, even as they dined with their nation's oppressors and profited from their people's suffering. It reminds us that the great moral struggles of history are not always fought on battlefields. They are often fought in quiet, well-appointed rooms, in the subtle choices people make every day. The choice to look away, the choice to say nothing, the choice to accept a small compromise for the sake of an easy life. The world of the Ritz is a quiet, powerful testament to the fact that the line between civilization and barbarism, between honor and shame, is not a vast, uncrossable chasm. It is a fine, fragile thread, and it can be severed with the clink of a champagne glass and a polite, accommodating smile. And so, our journey through the grey, fractured world of occupied France comes to its close. We have walked the streets of Paris in the shoes of a French policeman, a man caught in the impossible web of duty and collaboration, his every action a heavy compromise. We have followed the lonely, perilous path of Jean Moulin, a quiet bureaucrat who became the soul of the resistance. a man whose integrity became a weapon and whose silence became his ultimate victory. We have descended into the secret city beneath the streets, into the cold, damp cellars and catacombs, where a hidden war was fought with ink, paper, and whispered passwords. And we have sat at a table at the Ritz, in a bubble of surreal luxury, witnessing the quiet, comfortable arrangements made between the occupier and the occupied elite. What emerges from these disparate stories is not a simple narrative of good versus evil, of heroes versus villains. It is a far more complex and unsettling tapestry, a study in the infinite shades of grey that define human experience in times of crisis. It is a world where courage could take the form of a defiant silence, and where treason could be cloaked in the logic of pragmatism and good business. It is a world that reminds us that the great moral tests of history are rarely grand, dramatic confrontations. More often, they are a series of small, quiet, and deeply personal choices, made day after day in the ordinary course of a life that is trying, above all else, to simply continue. As you now settle more deeply into the peace and safety of your own surroundings, perhaps you can appreciate the profound comfort of moral clarity. Your world is one where, for the most part, your choices are not matters of life and death, where your allegiances are not constantly tested, where your conscience is not a daily battlefield. The quiet of your room, the simple safety of your own bed. These are freedoms that the people we have met tonight, the policeman, the resistor, the collaborator, could only dream of. So let the echoes of their world fade. Let the scent of Gauloise's smoke and damp earth dissipate. Let the whispers from the cellars and the clinking glasses from the Ritz fall silent. There are no more choices to be made tonight, no more compromises to be navigated. There is only the stillness of this moment, the gentle, easy rhythm of your own breathing, and the deep, quiet peace that awaits you. Allow yourself to drift now, to let go of these stories, and to find your own well-earned rest.